Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, the host. I suppose one could even say the mayor of this podcast. And joining me, the root to my rees and the mac to my cheese. Hey, look, not even 30 seconds, already an inside joke. Hey, forget that. It's Brian. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Scott, I hope we do a good job tonight and you don't end up being a goddamn coward.
Well, I'll put aside my cowardly ways because we are here to delve into and discuss the first 5 episodes of Widow's Bay, which I would say is the most talked about show on Apple TV since Severance, and you know how we like talking about that one. Now, although Widow's Bay waited until roughly half the series had aired, until they got into their backstory and history, I'm going to get into the backstory and history of this show right from the start, which is just one of the things to add length and hopefully girth, and I mean in terms of meaningful content, you dirty-minded people out there, to the podcast. Now, Widow's Bay. Widow's Bay is the long gestating brainchild of Katie Dippold. Katie Dippold, she's 46, but 20 years ago she was a writer for Mad TV. She went on to become a writer for a sitcom near and dear to our hearts here at the STV podcast, Parks and Recreation. And that is where we get to the surprisingly immediate Widow's Bay connection. Because when she was vying for a job as a writer on Parks and Rec, it meant getting the nod from that show's co-creator, head writer, and showrunner, Michael Schur. She submitted a spec script, something I know a lot about, for an episode. A script that bore more than an eerie resemblance to Widow's Bay. Now, while they never actually did an episode like Widow's Bay on Parks and Rec, Schur did get her sense of humor and liked her style of writing, and boom, she's a story editor and eventual writer for the series. But over the next decade plus, Dippold actually wrote several feature film comedy scripts, such as The Heat, the old woman version of Ghostbusters, and Haunted Mansion. She still had this idea for Widow's Bay percolating in her mind. In a recent interview with The Hollywood Reporter, she mentioned that over those years, whenever she would visit New York, she would invariably go to the Museum of Natural History. To quote her, she would say, "I'd walk around and I would imagine what the Widow's Bay version of the display cases would look like. That weirdly opened things up for me. The more I thought about the history of the island, that made it feel like a real place." So we fast forward to her when she actually sells the idea to Apple TV, and also, as being the creator, she is the showrunner for the series. She then goes on to assemble a writing staff whose experience covered an eclectic range from Saturday Night Live to Interview with a Vampire to WandaVision, Big Mouth, and hell, from Lock and Key to Key and Peele. Dippold's objective was always to be very careful with the tone. Never let the horror descend into parody. Keep the funny funny, keep the scary scary. Now, these episodes that we're going to talk about, they may drift sometimes from sometimes being darker than others. Some might be funnier than others. There may even be some that aren't very funny at all. But maintaining an overall tone to the series so that it always feels like no matter what's going on, this is Widow's Bay, regardless of the time period or characters focused upon. I think that, more than anything else, was the desired goal and focus of Katie Dippold and the rest of her writing staff, some of whom will be mentioned with certain episodes as I found them rather noteworthy. Although it is my belief that the writer and creator of a series are by far the most important people to note and acknowledge when discussing a project like A Widow's Bay, I would be remiss if I also didn't mention that the folks directing the series that worked alongside the two cinematographers for the series to give Widow's Bay a rather distinct and, needless to say, cinematic look and feel. Those two cinematographers are Christian Springer and Cody Jacobs, both of whom worked the cameras and achieved the look of series such as one of Brian's personal favorites, Atlanta. It's little wonder, then, that the director who helmed the first 3 episodes, as well as the final 2, was Hiro Murai. Murai had directed 26 episodes of Atlanta. That and a subsequent Donald Glover project, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which also joined Murai with Springer and Jacobs yet again. When you delve into Murai a little bit more, and I keep saying delve, that'll be the last time tonight, He also directed distinct and memorable episodes of visually appealing series that we actually really like here, such as Station 11, Barry, Snowfall, and Legion. Remember Legion? The other directors that they assembled for the series had worked on various series such as Severance, The Chair Company, Three Pines, Our Flag Means Death, The Crown. Oh, they even got Ty West to direct an episode, and he's the fellow who did the X Pearl Maxine trilogy. So we have a writer's room and a stable of directors whose skills cover more comedy and drama can lead straight up horror, excuse me. And an equal amount of care went into the casting. You got Stephen Root, who plays Wick. He's been a popular longtime everyman, flexing from comedy to drama and back again for decades. Then you have Kate Flynn, on the other hand, who's hardly known or recognized outside the UK. Oh, yeah, she's a Brit. She hides her accent so well she makes Hugh Laurie envious, but more of a comedy background for her. But the person that, especially attracted folks like me and Brian here would be Matthew Rees, a person we have adored on this podcast for his work on Perry Mason, The Beast in Me, and of course, The Americans, none of which were exactly laugh fests. But I think, and hopefully you'll agree with me here, that's key to his role as Mayor Tom Loftus. To a large degree, he kind of plays straight man to all the quirkier characters as well as the bizarre events and occurrences that occur around him at Widow's Bay. I think it's been said many a time before, the true comic actors aren't trying to be funny. They're playing it straight and real, and that's where the humor really derives from. Doesn't matter if you're Leslie Nielsen on Airplane or Naked Gun, or Jason Bateman on Arrested Development. Staying true to the character and being as serious as a cancer diagnosis, that somehow is how you get the laughs. Um, Brian, I think that's probably going to be enough backstory and history for now. Unless there's anything you think I might have missed, I think we can get to the episodes.
I just want to throw in 2 things, Scott. One of the
Please do.
names that's associated with this, is Colton Dunn, and, Colton Dunn is in the writing room on this show.
Yep.
He is known, if you watch Superstore, he played Garrett, and he was Brett, one of the stoner animal control officers on Parks and Rec. So he and Katie Dipple go back a ways. I thought it was interesting too, and well deserved. And we're probably both happy that Matthew Reese is an executive producer on this show, um, because obviously he has to carry the weight of it. But that's really all I have on the creative side. I just saw Colton Dunn and I was like, I know that name from somewhere, and looked it up. And sure enough, it's Brett and Garrett.
Well, as I had said, I'm going to be referencing who wrote and directed each of the episodes. So I did have a special thing in mind when we got to that episode. Colton Dunn, I believe, wrote the fifth episode of the season, which is the one where someone takes a very strange trip. I believe that was the one that he wrote. Um, so we will get there when we get there. Okay. So in the interest of making this whole lot smoother, the assumption for everyone listening, if you're listening to this podcast, you've already watched the entire season. Or if you're listening just to this one, you've at least watched the first 5 episodes. So it's already my plan, and it may be the case for my co-host as well. If something is clearly foreshadowing or even a hint of something that comes in a later episode, we're going to point it out when it happens rather than when it arises again later. At least for the most part. There may be an exception or two. Maybe I'm just not thinking when I say it. But normally, if there's a reason to mention something that happens in episode 7 when we're talking about episode 2, we're going to mention it. So just so you know. But we start the season off with the first episode, which was titled Welcome to Widow's Bay. As I had already said, this was directed by Hiro Murai and written by Dippold, along with some story editing work by Alberto Roldan and David B. Harris. Those two gentlemen tend to be the story editors for all 10 episodes, and they each get their own single episode to actually do the specific writing chores for. So I'm going to try to nutshell the basic episode and introduce the characters, which is probably why there'll be a bit more to say about the first episode than all the rest. And then Brian and I, we're going to focus on all the details and scenes that we choose to. And we are going to try to comb over these things very carefully because unlike some shows that we've talked about, this is a show where the devil really is in the details. No pun intended. I just thought of that, but now I was like, oh, me so smart. Okay. So As is the case with most pilots, this first episode is about introducing us to the people, the premise, and of course, the little coastal village of Widow's Bay. So, what do we get established? We get established that our main character is Mayor Tom Loftus, portrayed by Matthew Reeves. So, if one ever wondered, hey, what if we told the story of Jaws, but from the mayor's perspective, and let's replace the shark with 100 other possible horrors, well, that's as good as any elevator pitch for Widow's Bay. And without a trace of irony. The main character in Widow's Bay is, in fact, a widower, raising a clearly restless teenage son, Evan, all by himself after apparently losing his wife under tragic circumstances. We also meet his right-hand woman in this little town hall office, excuse me, Patricia, a role handled by the wonderfully and willfully dry Cato Flynn, a character who is quick to correct, quick to judge, and we will find out might not necessarily be the most beloved person in town. Then we see there's an adversarial relationship established with one Wick Crawford, played by the always reliable Stephen Root. Now, I had at one point I thought it was implied that Wick was in charge at one time, as if he was mayor. But during the rewatch, there was nothing to corroborate that, so I think I just imagined that. Um, and as much as Tom initially rejects and denies there's anything out of the ordinary about Widow's Bay, chalking up odd occurrences to coincidence and people clutching to superstitions, the older and more cantankerous Wick is quite the opposite. Lastly, I feel we should mention Sheriff Bashir Clemens, played by the consistently solid Kevin Carroll. While he may be a fish out of water the way Jaws Sheriff Brody was, he's much more the sadly typical reluctant and exasperated public servant than Brody ever was. And the premise from the start, the mayor wants to drum up tourist dollars for the quaint and quirky little town of Widow's Bay. And strange things happen. It also sets up a formula, for the most part. It's kind of like what they used to call back in the X-File days, the monster of the week format, where although there's certainly a continuing and serialized storyline, there will be at least one new creepy or scary obstacle monster to deal with in nearly every episode. So now that I think we've both watched this episode a number of times. I'll confess I've actually watched it three. Um, is there anywhere specific you want to go first, Brian? I will now cede the stage to you, and then we can go back and forth for the rest of this one.
I think we should just sort of start with talking of how the show establishes tone. And I know you had to be a big fan of seeing the font that came up with Widow's Bay. And, I learned as a result of this show, apparently there is a Stephen King font that is the font familiar with the titles of all his books. So I mean, this right off the bat, the font is evocative of Stephen King. And right off the bat, we start out in the water. You're reminiscent of maybe your favorite movie of all time, some people's favorite movie of all time, Jaws, and there's going to be plenty of Jaws sprinkled throughout the show. So I think that sets the tone early. What were your thoughts on the tone coming out of the gate on this show?
Well, I recall seeing the ads for the series, and I was very curious about where it was going to go tone-wise. And it as it proceeded, because I found the humor unexpected, and then I realized, oh, I get it now. And then as the episode proceeded, I was struck by they're doing a nice balance here because I believe the humor. And I mean that in the sense where it's like, for example, when we watch a sitcom, say like Parks and Rec, I remember because you had started watching this well before I did, and your great description of the show to intrigue me, even though I was already intrigued, I said, I already want to watch it. I've seen the ads. You don't need to sell me on it. But you said it was as if Mike Flanagan had written Parks and Recreation, and for I think most of our listeners know, but just to remind them, Mike Flanagan was the person behind shows like The Haunting of Hill House and The Fall of the House of Usher, Midnight Mass, and so on. And I was like, ooh, very interesting. But what I mean is when I'm watching a sitcom, and even really well done ones where there is at least a certain feeling, a slight feeling of reality to them, like a show like The Office, which is one of your favorites, or even perhaps less so, but perhaps Parks and Rec, whatever, or shows of that nature. But I'm always aware it's not a real world because it's a world of a comedy. Whereas something that's supposed to be dramatic, even something in a genre like this, still has to have that foothold on reality. So the oddness and quirkiness of characters, to me, mostly always I believe it. And even when it's if it's just a little further out there, it becomes like, oh, it's almost like a David Lynch thing to me now. Or it's almost like, you know what I mean? So it doesn't it never takes me out of it. It seems to work well. Also, the fact that you're balancing horror and comedy, which we haven't really seen before, because I don't consider, even though we both love a show like What We Do in the Shadows, that's comedy. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, it's vampires. One could say, like, yeah, you've never been scared of for a moment in any episode of what they did in the shadows. There are a number of times one is startled or frightened or at least very, very tense watching this series. And I was thinking about that, and I'm probably saying something which I put in my notes, that would have been in the next podcast. Horror and comedy are the two most reactive genres. They're the ones that people see used to feel, because now not so much with comedies anymore. Used to be, I need to go see that with an audience because there's something about people will strongly react, whether it be laughing or screaming, you know, more so than any other genre. So when you meld those together, it's a tricky thing to do. We've seen it done before, usually with movies like say Shaun of the Dead is a good example. It's a good that's a true horror comedy, I would say. But like I said in the description, doing it this way, which they do at Widow's Bay, and even with all the homages and most of the episodes, you can feel nods or homages to any number of things, and we'll point out a bunch. Jaws is a thing throughout the entire series, quite frankly. We'll be mentioning Jaws quite a few times with certain episodes. Um, it's never parody. That was her thing. Yeah, and it's never like when you have an episode which is clearly, riffing on the slasher genre, but it's not making fun of the slasher genre.
There's no camp. It's not
Yeah.
camp. It's straight.
And it's also to its credit, it's also not trying to do it's not overly trying to do the meta kind of thing like
Right.
Scream would do, where it's like we're being very self-aware. Even though there are moments like that, it's like, no, they're just not saying it. But a character is actually doing the things that we always yell at the camera for someone to do. It's like going, "Oh, someone's listening."
Yeah.
Even though someone should have gotten a shot to the head, but we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, I had told you when I think when I first started watching it, the first thing that struck me, and speaking as a quote, I'll still say quote unquote writer until my credit on IMDb actually means something. Um, Tone can sometimes be the most difficult thing to achieve in whatever it is you're writing, and the undertaking of melding these two genres together and it being a serialized television series as well is so difficult. And just by these, because when I got through the first couple episodes, I was like going, "Oh, this is really good. I'm really impressed by this." And I say that knowing, and I don't think I'm telling tales out of school with, I don't know our respective opinions here, but I think we are on the same page. This is a show that I think actually gets better as it goes along. So yeah, the tone definitely did strike me. You're absolutely right.
Well, let's dive in and talk about the world. I thought what separates this from a lot of shows is that centering it on the mayor, we deal immediately with a municipal idea that how am I going to attract people to my city? How are we going to invigorate the local economy? And I thought the show smartly did two things. It established a desire for this town to grow, but yet have a sense of history and set some rules. And I thought one of the interesting rules it sets early in this show, and it's crucial to the success of the show, is because of this location and where it's at and its challenges, that cell phone reception is notoriously bad on this island. And that is a great goalpost to set up right out of the gate because so many of the movies of our youth would be entirely ruined by a cell phone. So I like that we're heading off on this idea of the mayor wanting something better for his town and wanting to move forward, but we've got the challenge of a terrible infrastructure in this town, and that adds to the drama we'll see unfold throughout the course of the show.
I love that you pointed that out because, again, putting on my fake writer's hat, I mean, I've had this conversation many a time over the last 10, 15 years when working on certain scripts of how the advent of the smartphone and cell phones or smartphones, however, whichever type you're talking about for the last 25 years plus, um, have really ruined a lot of how you would construct stories. And now, and it's funny because when you watch a lot of TV shows and movies, now they have to use them if it's modern day, and it kind of takes something out of the storytelling because now all of a sudden we have to have text, on screen and people communicate in order and things just become easier. Whereas once upon a time, it was like going, oh, there's no such thing as missing a call now. Or angrily hanging up on somebody.
Right.
You can't have the scene of, De Niro smashing the phone, you know, in the phone booth when he finds out that, that Joe Pesci has been killed because it wouldn't work. I'd be like, oh man, what was it? Throw the phone? Yeah, so I got that they did that too because it also meant that on one hand, the writers have to work different muscles and it makes it both easier and harder at the same time. Cell phones and use in movies and TV often feels to me like it's a cop out. It just makes everything easier and making things easier for your characters, no matter what kind of story you're telling, comedy, drama, whatever, is never interesting. That's why quite frankly, stories that precede the use of cell phones and quite frankly precede computers, if you want to go further back, makes things a lot more difficult for characters to achieve, their means. Because I don't really think there's much computer use if you're other than seeing the radar, and that doesn't count. I don't think we see anyone actually using a computer on in this series if I'm not
No,
mistaken.
it's very analog, not very digital, and, I like the conceit of the New York Times travel writer coming to the island and Tom wanting to impress him, showing him around, and if you catch, a couple of early things, that are some, probably Easter eggs for the future. One of the things is, Tom looks at a calendar and you see that he sets the calendar's month as April, so that establishes our time frame. He's wanting a good ride up so the summer travel will come to the island so that they can get summer tourists. But you see an odd picture of a car overturned on a road on the calendar as he flips through the calendar, and he even makes a face, when he sees it, and there's a possible story there, and then as we go down towards the harbor, we see the headless statue of Richard Warren, very reminiscent of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow.
Well, to get specific about that calendar first, because there's no reason not to, since it's shown pretty clearly on camera. It's a calendar about wolves,
Yes.
and if you notice when they flip through the pages, you're I think it might be April actually. No, it's either April or May. I think April is you see it's a howling wolf. In the following month, it's a wolf pack, and then the following one is the overturned truck. Now, my thinking when I was watching that initially was like, is this meant to indicate that the calendar is specific to Widow's Bay and July is the bad month, which echoes July in Jaws, because that's where the shark business was on the 4th of July weekend, or can we? Here's an example of us fast forwarding to something we hear, quite frankly, in the final episode. Can we make a connection to something that Ruth says in passing in the final episode about, one of the many men who made her pass her, excuse me, her boyfriend, actually Alfred, the one who was bit by an animal and then became that animal? That's the way you refer to a werewolf. So is that overturned truck indicating someone was attacked and then became a werewolf? I just love little things like that. There's a lot of interesting seed planting throughout this episode that's kind of I don't want to let pass as we go through it. I mean, I noticed again one of the things. This was one of my favorite things to rewatch. We've done shows where we watched and then we had to go back and rewatch them. Excellent shows. Shows like The Bear, which we'll probably be doing a podcast about in about a week's time. Nothing. This was one we finally got a show for the first time in years, you know, where it's like, oh, now we can look for and find all these interesting details or fun things, that really both are precursors to what happens later, even if we didn't get it at the time, or they're new mysterious elements that we kind of have fun with. Like, I like the idea that if you're paying attention, we're only a few minutes into the very first episode, and you do hear Rosemary, who's played by the scene-stealing, raspy voiced Dale Dickey. She's talking about how she ran the genealogy on someone. So they tell us that this is something she does just less than 5 minutes into the very first episode. So it's little things like that. You mentioned the New York Times writer. Love that whole concept that they did, but everyone and this they also did this in the ad. They kind of were it was one of their little ways to sell the show. I had especially enjoyed the brief tour he takes with the museum displays. Now, I actually took this is how much I care about our podcast, kids. I actually took screenshots of a couple of the articles that were briefly focused on. So I just if you so the one with the, with the man with the horse killed by the horse with the horse. An unknown man was found a fortnight ago, laying by his still saddled horse, without any life still within his body. He showed no signs of trauma, and his horse faithfully stood by his side on the ground. I just like, but the better one, this one, the one priest eaten by whale. Let me just blow this one up on me. A whale seemed to come from nowhere and appear on the beach while Father Albertus was taking a Sunday afternoon stroll after his sermon had ended. Some are calling it a strange act of nature, as a couple of fishermen just off the shoreline saw the whale appear to breach the shore and open its mouth to swallow the poor fellow wholly up. I like it was wholly up.
Holy up.
Was, was there a pun there they were trying?
Oh, the tour, if we start there, I mean, we and this is where very early in this show we get the humor
Uh-huh.
of the show. You can already tell there's gonna be comedy between Tom and Patricia. Um, but when the writer is taking the tour and Tom is uneasy and he, questions him about we hear about cannibalism, we hear about the deadly storm in 1786, and maybe the funniest thing is when they said the witch trial. We have a great sense of pride because we caught them and we burned them. Like it's quirky, but it's played straight. It's really funny. We learn interestingly 42 people arrive from the mainland, and immediately you get the sense they're hiding someone because you've been 43, nope, 42. Um, and the other little piece that's thrown in, Tom throws in, is their lighthouse is the second oldest lighthouse in America. So there's all this world building really quickly and really economically at the historical society that's great.
And one of the really fascinating things about the historical society is it becomes one of those if someone wants to go Easter egg crazy and just like freeze on things, when you freeze it in a certain way where you can see all the different framed images, almost every framed image foretells a future episode of the show in one form or another. The interesting thing I thought though, beyond because I thought that was a cute thing. But the big thing in the middle about the outbreak of cannibalism, and we hear it's
Yes.
because the citizenry was forced to take shelter in the church. I just thought, again, spoiling something for a later podcast, but we've all watched it. Who cares? I was actually a little surprised that no one specifically mentioned that during the final episode because the setup was there. But I just remember thinking, I was like, is anyone going to start mentioning it? I mean, especially when they found out the food was going bad. So let me just flip through the episode. Oh, you had mentioned the thing about Stephen King font and whatever. Of course, I also the font. I also thought was interesting. Even just the words that were chosen: Salem's Lot, Widow's Bay, are same number of letters, so it's even in the same shape. I mean, I actually have a first edition of Salem's Lot in this house. Book club edition, but still first edition. One of my favorite books. But also, as far as Stephen King stuff in the very first episode, one thing that's established is Patricia. Her outfits and her look, even right down to her hair, are clearly meant to echo the look and wardrobe of Wendy Torrance in the Kubrick version of The Shining. I mean, there's no getting around that. You see, and speaking of Patricia, I also like the fact that right off the bat in this first episode, um, she references her boogeyman encounter, which we know is going to pay major dividends throughout the series, and then in a major way once we get to like I believe it's the eighth episode, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and we get in this part of the episode, this is where we get introduced to Wick being the guy that's yelling at everybody else saying there's something wrong with the house that nobody's listening. He's the person, and I thought it was interesting that he makes it a point to use the term "it's a haunt," and really drills in on that. Says the island is waking up, alluding to the island or the entity, whatever, is actually a living thing, which we may or may not discover is true or figurative. But all the groundwork is set to set the stakes in this first episode, and I find it really interesting they did that. There's also a little Easter egg that I'm curious if it's going to go anywhere. The way Tom talks about his wife is he said when he married her that she was already pregnant with you. And those were his words, which is a weird way to say it. And I guess the question will be I think I'm assuming that's his son, and maybe that was said vaguely because this was the first episode. But they left wiggle room that Tom might not be Evan's son, or might not be Evan's dad. And if we're looking at horror tropes, the bad seed that's maybe the child of the devil could be a future episode in the seasons. So I thought that was interesting, and that's why this show's so worth rewatching. If you haven't done it, I recommend doing it.
I would I would think the fact that this, as we learn in the final episode, so big time spoilers. If you if you haven't watched the final, then you shouldn't be listening to this podcast at all. Um, that we discover, and we had many of us had probably long suspected, especially as we went, especially after the Richard Warren episodes. Um, well, the lineage comes from Lauren, so as far as the bad seed aspect, I think it would already be present in him because that's kind of part of the whole
It would
covenant
be,
together.
but could she have gotten pregnant in another way and him not even be Tom's son,
Uh,
which would be terribly heartbreaking and usually isn't the milieu I would expect the way Katie Dippled to go. But I'm just saying that it was an odd way to phrase that when he said it.
okay, I honestly, and I've rewatched it three times. I guess I must have just blanked on that every time, or it just didn't hit me in the same way because I thought it was just an odd way of phrasing something, but I didn't take it the way you took it. I'll put it that way. Let me think what else we have here. Oh, so with Tom, now we have this set up kind of like I said, like the Jaws thing, where he's kind of the person in denial because he just wants to, try to bring tourists to the island, and Wick is the person on the opposite end of that. But you can start to see that being peeled away right from the very first episode on. You know, like when he's attacked by the white-eyed Shep. Shep was the guy in the very beginning of the episode who's on the boat, then disappears, and they find him again, and so on. Oh, by the way, some folks might want to focus on the fact that when Tom looks at his chart in the when he's in the hospital room, it mentions that it looks like his age is 37. He said that's not right. Okay, just so everyone can dismiss that. Dippold herself has said, no, that only means that it's a bad doctor. It doesn't mean anything else. She's actually said that. So if I know we all want to go on about, Oh, people's ages can be a little funny. Did you hear what she says in that flashback episode when she refers to herself as being, 10 and almost four? It's like going, no, that character doesn't mean she's almost 14. That's not what that meant. And that's not what this means either. Although it would have been kind of funny if it did, because there is a running gag with Patricia reacting to older men and clearly too young for them, child brides and stuff like that. But I thought from that point on, Tom's character, his constant jitters, which leads him to him screaming, "There's something in the fog," when he's trying to keep residents from leaving the restaurant during that power outage. And there's this huge, heavy fog rolling down the roads of Widow's Bay. That alone indicates that despite all his denials and even mocking people like Wick, Tom might be a believer after all. He's been in denial, but he's very aware of these things. Um, Other little details I kind of like catching as we watch it. The son, Evan, being so unknowingly correct when he actually says, "This island is like a prison." Yeah, it is. It's exactly a prison for you, kid.
Exactly, exactly. And I thought if there is the show is not like you said before, it's not meta. But I thought if there is a sort of a mission statement for this show in the first episode, it's when he does that, and then the power comes on, and the New York Times guy says, "Oh, I see what you're trying to do. You don't have to do that. You're trying to be Salem instead of Martha's Vineyard. You don't need to do." He said, "You don't need a gimmick. This place is great." And it's almost like the mission statement of the show. The show doesn't need to be gimmicky. It doesn't need to be campy. Just be yourself, and it'll be good. And that episode ends with Tom standing in front of a sign very prominently that says "Don't give up the ship," which is a reference to a naval battle from 1812 that was a well-known naval slogan. I think from a battle maybe in the Great Lakes or something, but stands in front of that sign, and then we end in very Lost fashion with the dive down the hatch with the chair and end on a mythology shot that really sets up that this show's going to have a lot to offer people. If you like comedy, it's there. If you like mythology, it's there. And if you like, you know, just scary stuff, it's there. So really a great first episode.
Absolutely. One thing I want to do with at least some of these episodes before I move on to whatever the next one is, if I feel there's something worthwhile to cite as far as what movie or whatever else they may be referencing in a major way in the episode, with this one beyond the obvious parallels to Jaws that we will, as I've already said, we will continue to see throughout the series. Um, as I just said, every episode has at least one major nod or homage to an horror movie. I have to cite the John Carpenter 1980 film The Fog. A small coastal town, a creepy fog rolls in, and guess what? Just like that story told by Wick at one point, about a ship that has been wrecked off a shore and the dead sailors come in for the fog to seek revenge on the town. We got a little bit of that happening here as well. Anything else? I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to say. I'm going to move on. Oh, I'm gonna one dopey thing, and then we're gonna move on. Only really silly point. This is an island with no Wi-Fi, which also, to me, because it's remote, means no cable. So it means it can probably only pick up broadcast signals, as we've seen. So it's only whatever local TV stations they can pick up. So and this is taking place now. This is present day. This isn't taking place 30, 40 years ago, whatever. How is the harbor master watching an episode of Family Feud, which is clearly from the 1970s? He can't access the game show network. There's no local stations showing the old Richard Dawson episodes of Family Feud. But he's watching one, and I'm like, I don't know how that's possible, but I love that they made that choice because it's just so much more weird than say being like the Steve Harvey version or something like that. I just thought that was kind of silly and fun.
Well, just wait till we talk about dated TV in the next episode.
So let's get to the next episode 2, which was titled Lodging, which was directed and written by the same people behind the first episode. Okay, the nutshell for this one would be on the heels of a rave review from the New York Times, our beleaguered Mayor Tom must spend a night in the supposedly haunted Breakwater Inn that has been a house of horrors over the years. Also, we meet Reverend Bryce, played by Tony Huss. Is it Tony? I said
Toby.
Toby. I said Tony, sorry. Who many of us here at this podcast had a great appreciation for, especially in the underrated series Halt and Catch Fire. He is the man presiding over a church whose bells shouldn't be ringing. There are so many fun little details in this one and scenes as well. Where does one begin to explore, Brian? Where do you want to go first on this one? Because I know
Well,
where I'm going to go.
I don't think you can start without saying after you watch this show. Here's the beauty of rewatching this show. When I rewatched this episode, I went, "Oh, the church bell's ringing. Let me rewind and count how many times the church bell rings." As you watch this the first time, you're not aware of the significance, but on rewatch you do, and it rings 9 times.
Yep.
And we'll learn later in the show what that means. So, uh, on rewatch, that was a great point. But I think we learn this episode establishes two things. It establishes that Tom is not from there, and Tom is the outsider, and that's really brought to a point when early on Wick, who we also learn may have a drinking problem, and we see him take shots throughout the show. But he's pretty hammered trying to keep people out of the inn. And when Tom gets really mad at him, he calls him a fucking hick and pisses a lot of the people in the town off, which ultimately leads to the showdown in the bar that's the inciting event for him to stay at the inn.
Right. That's when the townspeople basically dare him to spend the night at the inn, and he ends up writing down a list, a checklist, if you will. I would like to go through that checklist right now because it's my podcast and that's what I'm going to do. So, first thing on the checklist is staying in the captain's suite. This is where a captain killed his family with an axe. I believe that's meant to evoke a certain story of a caretaker of a hotel who killed his family with an axe. Next, we have the ungrateful Hortense Fitzgerald, a supposedly ugly bride who fled her wedding but fell out of a window at the inn. And if you say her name 3 times, her ungrateful reflection appears. Now, this harkens back first to the classic Bloody Mary ghost story, where you say that name 3 times to summon her. And of course, we've seen this device used over the past 40 years on things like Beetlejuice and Candyman. Um, and also, I should also point out one more thing. When we get a certain genealogy much later in the season, uh, the ungrateful Hortense Fitzgerald is one of the members of that genealogy. I think there's someone else too. Um, then we have we have the 1962 New Year's Eve disaster, which apparently led to the head of John Reynolds being severed and left in the hotel dumbwaiter. Now, New Year's Eve disasters, I kind of am tempted to connect that to The Shining as well, since there was certainly something going on with a New Year's Eve celebration on that. Um, I have a little joke to make about this that's more about probably the end of the podcast or into the second podcast, but well, I'll just say it now just to get ahead of myself. There are a number of things we hear that have happened on the island, disasters, which I know we probably will never see a flashback of them, but this is among the ones I'd really like to see. There's at least one that's mentioned in the very last episode. I was like going, I really want to see that one. But we do get to see the 1951 clown killer. Killer clown, not a killer who murders clowns, Tom. Uh, I should be pointing out what as I'm going through these. Whether Tom takes care of him. Like the ungrateful Hortense, he does that. Done by Tom, nothing happens. The New Year's Eve disaster thing. He hears the countdown and then screams through the vent in the bathroom. There is nothing really for him to do as far as that's concerned. The clown killer, as we know, Tom encounters Willie as a guest there, and who then follows him into the crawl space later, and we see he is a clown. Now, here's one I'm very confused by. He had it on his list, Dead Man's Closet. And we do see Tom go into a closet, with the lights out for a certain amount of time, whatever. He initially can't get out, but he does eventually get out. I never got what the story was, what that was connected to. They don't, so I wasn't just me. I'm not crazy. We never get the explanation. And then we have finally the crawl space, which we can thank Rosemary for. Here should go in the crawl space. Now, that inn, the actual inn itself, the breakwater inn itself, draws inspiration from a couple sources. First of all, it's very meant to be the look of it is supposed to meant to be in the same vein as the work of Edward Hopper. Most most likely or most prominently, vividly, his painting House by the Railroad. Now, what's funny about that is that was also the image and painting that provided inspiration for one Mr. Alfred Hitchcock over 66 years ago when they were trying to conceive of the look for the Bates house. And in fact, with this production here, details were added to the look of the inn via digital post production to further create that Bates house connection when they added that little eerie tower on top of the inn. It looks kind of like a haunted attic. That's not actually there. And they put it there because it looks like the same structure from Psycho. Me being a big Psycho fan, I noticed that right off the bat. I didn't even need to be, then when I read about it, like, oh, excellent. Um, Also, speaking of The Shining, when Tom goes into the hotel, and I think is when he rings the bell. Did you notice the music that's playing? Because it's old timey music, like the kind of music that we hear in The Shining. So it seems like they keep wanting to hit us in the face with Shining
Yeah,
connection.
like a 1920s, 1930s show tune type sound music.
Now, I got a question because they focused on this painting in multiple episodes, and I'm wondering if, and I didn't go back again. The painting where we see it's supposed to be we realize we eventually come to realize it's supposed to be Sarah Warren trying to escape in the water with the children, and then there's that one child who's in the foreground of the painting who is actually Frances Warren. What I didn't see initially, and then I noticed is there's someone reaching out to her, actually like holding like a piece of wood for adult to grab onto. And it's painted very lightly, but so maybe that's why I didn't notice it initially. But then I did on subsequent viewings. Um, I just thought that was really interesting. That was like, they're also telling you a major story element, like right this very first episode, and we have no idea what it means at this point.
Yeah, yeah, but this is the first prominent feature of the girl in the water painting. But we also get in this episode, it's kind of interesting that the priest is doing the early mythology work here. That the priest is told the bell rang, he did not hear it, and he goes to check and finds the bell is completely chained up in the top of the belfry, and he goes to the archives and begins reading, and the top of the entry that he reads says, "Should the bell toll, there are steps you must take." And this is where he begins to learn the awful truth of what's happened. And the priests throughout this, all the priests mentioned in this, um, play a part in the doings on the island, and we'll see that later. But that sort of cracks the lid on the deeper mythology that something is afoot with the bell.
Right, right, absolutely right. Um, I'm gonna drift back to the breakwater inn because of there's so much fun stuff there.
Oh, there is, but let me say something real quick.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we can the rest we can go back to the end after this, but interestingly, there's a quick nod that upon rewatch you realize, who does Tom always send Evan to stay with? Episode 2, he goes to stay with Ruth.
Right, right. I mean, to the point where she actually has a room set up for him.
Yes.
I mean, which is an unusual thing to do, unless you already know you have a closer relationship with this child.
Yes, but an early nod that, watching the first time, you
Right,
don't
right,
get it.
right, 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 right. So when Tom is in the room and he puts on the TV, got to talk about this. Sees a guy on TV. It's like this little "Welcome to Widow's Bay," and it looks like it was something that was filmed, like 40 years ago or something. And then he says, "Come with me," and we watch him as he walks down the shoreline, and eventually off screen, and the camera just stays there, and it stays there. And then later on, it's put on again, and it's still there. And then all of a sudden, we see a small little creepy silhouette off in the distance. It's a moment that works. There's a funny aspect to it, and then it's kind of a disturbing thing. And then the more you think about it, the creepier it is. And there's a lot of that we will get to in later episodes where there's things that we watch via, video or reel to reel film or whatever, which there's humor there, and then it's ultimately kind of creepy and disturbing more so. However, there are a few things that are both funny and creepy as much as the games that are available in the closet of this inn. The first one, which is a game that Tom eventually does play with his fellow quote unquote guest William. Oh, by the way, William is played by Tim Balsey from the Righteous Gemstones, which is, by the way, how you knew there had to be more up with the guy, because I was like, I recognize an actor. There's got to be more to him then. The game they're playing is Daddy's Home. The box depicts a maniacal, perhaps zombified dad at the dinner table with his idyllic 50s style family. Later, when they're playing, we see the game pieces are a beer, an alcohol decanter, a bottle of red label, I'm going to guess scotch, it looks more like Johnny Walker Red, a rolled up newspaper, a bat, a pot, and the best one, a clearly doubled over, bunched up belt. The kind that you would beat someone with. And then you get cards in the game like, uh-oh, daddy's younger boss yelled at him.
Yeah. Yeah, which is both terrifying, the implications of what that game suggests about the 50s male,
Oh yeah.
but the humor of the way it's delivered is funny. But, a couple of the other games, we
Yeah.
get Teeth, which you just open and basically has a pair of pliers in the box. And then, one of the gags I like, the game Run, where you just turn the cards that says not yet, not yet, not yet, run. And, but I guess basically the card version of Duck Duck Goose. Yeah, creepy, creepy old games. And the set decor here of like the old alcohol bottles and the old games is marvelous.
The only other game that was there that I loved seeing, that just I don't always see the title of it, but it's so perfect, especially when it's the one that's right under Daddy's Home, is She Shouldn't Have Said That. That's the name of a game. Um, Also, because you were talking about things when we learned stuff about Tom, but we get backstory on Tom's childhood. Find out things like his mother's from the mainland, his father's from Widow's Bay, but Tom grew up in Massachusetts. He would only come here for the summers. And we learn that his father was rather abusive and mean, called him soft. And his father was first one to speak of the different horrors on the island, and how Tom came to live there years later when his father was old and sick. And that was where he eventually met his wife, Lauren. Also, it's interesting to note that the guest who turns out to not ever be there, William is the one who encourages Tom to finish the checklist, because I think Tom had already kind of given up on it, and he's meaning he's meaning the crawl space. I was wondering, is Tom meeting William a little bit like Jack meeting either the bartender Lloyd, or better yet, Grady, who also turns out to be a ghost of murderers past? And William is the one who says there's no such thing as ghosts. I was like, oh, you know what they do? They lie. You know who else lies? Tom. Oh, we'll get to that later.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought, Tom's backstory, basically, that his dad told him all these, and the way Tom says it is all these terrible stories about the island. stuff that he should have never had to have heard. And after we watched the show, it maybe Tom's dad was telling him the truth, and that's why they left. But thought that was really interesting for the music fans. The song playing while Tom and William are playing is a song called "Cowboy Colored Day" by Ron Hines, a 1972 song of, I don't want to say no repute, but very, very obscure song, and I probably picked for the time frame it evoked more than anything to show that most of the games and most of the things in this inn were of the past. As we learned at the beginning of the episode, the innkeeper had just got this place ready to open up for the summer, and so most of the stuff's out of date. But if we go back to the crawl space quickly, that was the first moment that I went, "Ugh," when the clown, like, the way he stands at the entrance and Tom's talking to him, he doesn't talk back for a second, and then you hear it's his voice and he leans down. When he comes crawling quickly up that crawl space, it that was my first sort of, like, involuntary jerk moment in the show.
Gotcha. My favorite bit within the crawl space is less so about the clown, is that rotting corpse that Tom sees and shrieks as he's trying to back away from Willie the Evil Clown, because that corpse is wearing the same exact shirt as Tom, which implies it's Tom's own dead body there. And it's like, ooh, what's going on here? Among other things that happen in that inn, much after all the misadventures, um, it's later on with all the dares about going into the room, not dares, but, having Kurt, the owner, go in there and realizing how time moves differently for different people. Although it didn't seem to do that for Tom, but might maybe do that to other people. But one of the things that happens is when they put him in there for 30 seconds, it looks like a lot more than 30 seconds has passed, considering, looks like Kurt has wrecked the room. But he also notices the wallpaper peeling off, and there's this black mold on it. And that's kind of a classic horror trope. This speaks to how black mold is often used or referenced in horror films, to gaslight characters into believing everything they experience is in their heads or depict the literal decay of the environment. We've seen it used in Get Out or The Haunting of Hill House, speaking of Mike Flanagan before. Um, and lastly, speaking, since as I had said, I wanted to talk about things that involve the homages or nods to other things. Well, obviously, when you're dealing with an episode that's focused a lot around a haunted inn or hotel, the easiest connection is going to be to The Shining and also Stephen King's 1408 as well. Because like even that idea that time appears to move differently within that room, that also happens in 1408. So you can make that connection there as well.
Yeah, great stuff. I this is where, this is the first time we really see the sheriff come in on it. The sheriff's there with Tom and with Kurt, and, sheriff sees the video. It is interesting that he had the video cameras in the hotel, like when one of the gags, "Sign your name to the honor bar." A good joke, but
And he's continuing to watch, which is only a
yes.
little bit creepy.
And he's continuing to watch, which is creepy, yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I continued the momentum of the first episode and really enjoyable. The interesting thing is that Tom has a jump in time between the clown, and he just wakes up in bed the next day, and, it'd be interesting to see if he ever remembers what happened or if we leave that alone.
Well, I wonder because we're gonna be getting to another episode where there is a lot more significance with Tom and time jumps and the curiosity of what happened there. And my assumption is those blanks will not be filled in. It's for us to fill in. So as I'm filling in here, we should get to the third episode, which was titled "The Inaugural Swim." Again, this was directed by Hiro Murai, but this one, while still edited by Roldan and Harris, instead of Katie DePold, this episode was written by somebody else. This episode was written by Neil Casey. Neil Casey is the man who plays the innkeeper we just spent some time with in the previous episode. Casey is a writer slash actor for years. He wrote for Saturday Night Live, among other things, and has done both screen acting, as we see here, as well as on shows like The League and Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's also tended to do a lot of voice work on shows like Big Mouth and Star Trek Lower Decks. Okay, let's get to the quickie nutshell description so we can crack this one apart. You'll notice that my descriptions are going to continue to get smaller and smaller. Yay! That's a first for this podcast. With the inaugural swim and sunset cocktails on the calendar and tourists filling the local establishments, Mayor Tom encounters two very different females on the road. Or does he? We know one of them nearly leads to his death. Brian, I almost want to start right with that informational video we see playing at the Widows Bay Historical Society Museum, which, by the way, since we haven't mentioned it yet, turns out that building used to be the home of Richard Warren a few hundred years earlier. The part it's kind of like what I was talking about with the video that he was watching at the inn. The part where the narrator goes to leave the room, the door won't open, so he just stands there facing the wall. It's funny for a moment, and then it's not funny.
And then
It's
it's Blair Witch
very
Project.
Blair Witch Project, exactly. It's going and again, that right there is an example of how delicate and careful and risky it is with tone on this show. And it's like it's funny, and then it's not, and it works on both levels, just like that video did. It's so
Well,
mm,
I'm glad you said that because I think the thing about this show is sometimes they make you laugh to break the horror tension, and sometimes you stop laughing because the horror comes at the end of the joke. Like they flip that dynamic. It's not always the same.
right.
And this is a great example, of the horror coming at the end where you laugh, but then it goes on just a little too long and you become uncomfortable.
Absolutely. This is also one of the episodes that really dives, no pun intended, dives deeper into Jaws territory than some of the other episodes. There is at least one more that does a lot of Jaws stuff. This is one that I don't think people have pointed. I personally have not seen anyone else point this out, but I don't know. I haven't read every article. I'm just talking about the very opening episode. Upbeat music, flourishes of
Tourists
brass
everywhere.
instruments, tourists everywhere. It looks exactly like the early parts of Jaws when the tourists were all pouring into Amity for the summer. Then, of course, we do see, we'll just knock them off right now. We see the shark doodle on the chalkboard, which is clearly a riff on the chalk doodle, that we see in the community center in Jaws. That buoy that Tom swims to, and then the subsequent underwater chase from the old sea hag is kind of sort of reminiscent of the buoy from Jaws and being chased by a shark there. Although it also looks like some other classic underwater sea creature chases from film, but we'll stick with Jaws for this one. And by the way, it, I think this was the first episode that started to occur to me, and then it becomes much more obvious in later episodes. In some ways, if you're going to go down the Jaws path, Wick is a stand-in for Quint, a little bit at least. Certainly a lot in the later episode that we're not getting to right now. Oh,
He's a lot, Quint. But at the beginning, interestingly, the song playing to give the festive mood is George Benson's "Give Me the Night."
I didn't know that. Hmm.
But
Still,
we get to meet Marissa, and Marissa is the first possible love interest that Tom encounters, and he actually pretty smoothly convinces her. I did think it was kind of a flex that was out of character for Tom to show some confidence to say, "I'm the mayor. If you don't believe me, I'm on page 4." I thought that's a pretty solid way to back up your credentials.
it was, although at that point, I think he's literally just trying to set her mind at ease. I don't maybe because he's been so out of the game for so long, and the more we learn, the more we understand why. I don't know if he's trying to pick I don't think he's trying to pick her up at that point just yet. Um, it's an interesting dynamic that happens there, and it's ultimately kind of sad. Um, but it does mess with the viewers as well as Tom. Also, one interesting about this show, you know, I think this is one of the only series I've ever seen that not once but twice a sea shanty plays a significant part in the storytelling. And in this episode, it's Wick relating the tale of the old sea hag. And we're going to see a different song with Wick's participation too in the seventh episode. But I want to stay here for a moment. I mean, in this scene, this is when Wick tells Tom to start a sea hag. This turns out to be the first scene that these two filmed together in the series. This was the first scene, which means at least these first three episodes, because they're all shot by the same director, were not shot remotely chronologically. If the first scene is actually in the third episode, I
Yeah.
like I just find that very interesting. Because it also sometimes things are directed in a somewhat chronological way, depending if it's helping to build a performance, and they didn't do that here. But maybe it wasn't as important for a scene like this. But I just thought that was fascinating when I came across that little factoid. Um, uh, Much like the other song, I gotta say something about this song. The song itself about the sea hag. It's again the combo of being just enough amusing, but also creepy, and and still somewhat completely plausible. And when Root, I guess I'm using the actor's name, not the character's name, because I'm attributing it more to his performance, because it's what I didn't see coming. That's when he initially just goes, "Oh,
Yeah.
oh," I'm like going, "What is he doing?" And then you realize he's doing the opening and he's about to do the song, which I think it goes something. I'm not going to try to sing it. I'm just going to try. I'm trying to say it. It's Lad say farewell to ensign Trag. He went to shore and met the hag. With just one gash betrothed they be. She followed him on land and sea. For if you let her pierce your skin, betwixt her thighs your final sin. I love the seriousness and bizarre nature of the song. And then when when Tom asks how to get you, the whole thing is like, she sits on your face.
She sits on your face.
And I lost it when I watched that the first time. It's like, he didn't just say what I thought he said. Like,
He sure did.
uh,
He sure did. And it's interesting. You think she scratches you on sea and land, and she scratches Tom on sea and land.
oh yeah.
A lot of great foreshadowing. Um, and just because people know I'm the music person, there's a song playing at the bar while Tom waits for Marissa. It's from a Red Bull ad. It's really not, the artist can't even be located. It was a piece of music, and name of it is Born to Run, but it's not Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. And there was a brief passage of the song The River by Brian Eno and John Cale
Well,
played there. But then we get to, the Tom seeing the woman in the road. And what was your take on the scene of him seeing the lady walking down the middle of the road? This had like an It Follows or The Ring kind of vibe to it, where
I
can't
was
see the face.
I was thinking The Ring a lot, especially with the way the hair and dress. Basically, if the Ring girl got old, that's ba that's basically what it was to me. Because even when I was writing up the notes for, it's like, okay, we got all the Jaw stuff, but we gotta say the old sea hag is very reminiscent of the creepy girl from The Ring. There may be other references that might have been lost on me. Oh, by the way, just to go with Jaws one more time, the fact that Wick kills the sea hag with a harpoon also makes him very analogous to Quint. Who else would have a harpoon with them? Not a gun, a harpoon. Um, Something about just flipping just for a moment to Reverend Bryce, and when everything he's going through. There's one little thing I thought was interesting because it's going to connect to a later episode that we'll talk about, and I'll just mention it here instead of waiting till then. When I think it's after he walks through the woods, and then he goes to a well. Then you see him listening at the well. That has to be the well that we then, in a later episode, we see Sarah Warren arise from, which is connected to the tunnels which we know those tunnels lead to a certain very bad room. So
Yes.
that must be where the voices or whatever it is he's hearing is emanating from. Okay. I just want to make sure. That's what I thought.
And the implication is, I think at this point, he's taken the mushrooms already because that's why he seems weird to the kids when they're hanging out and smoking pot, and he just walks out and says, "This place is evil,"
Right.
and then
Right.
walks off strangely. So I think, we learn later the implication is he's tripping balls at this point, and Alan's trying to talk to him.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, the only other things that I would ever mention about the episode, as I kind of hinted at before, this is one of the episodes, the moment when um, Tom refuses to let Marissa in. And if we are not sure ourselves, if maybe it's possible she is the sea hag. We didn't, just because she interacted with the waitress at the restaurant. By the way, we probably should have mentioned the really bad running gag of the really bad waitress in this. Who I get is that the same waitress who is the creepy silhouette in the dark, which was which could have been really beautifully horrific, but still works. But just when we see Marissa go back to her friends in the cab and you realize, no, this was a real thing, and he did that, and you'll never know. I found that rather tragic.
I thought that was nice that this show has enough ambiguity that sort of leads to the melancholy you feel for Tom that like he can't even do anything normal because this island's so messed up. That's how it ruins people's lives.
Right, absolutely. Another thing, speaking about talking about things still being analog, whatever, that we get to use an answering machine, which
Oh my God.
remember, I used to love having an answering machine when I got home. It's like, be like when you got home, it's like you saw like a blinking light. Maybe you had a number that had like a 3 or a 4 or whatever. And the fact there are messages on his machine, one of which is going to relate to the very next episode, and even a later message and a radio transmission to end the episode. This is all relating to episode 4, which we're going to be talking about in probably the next 30 seconds. This was a really fun episode. The next episode, I was already sold on this series 10 minutes into it. But when I was trying to get other people to watch it, the episode we're about to talk about is the one that I kept citing because it still might be my favorite. If it's not my favorite, I'm not sure what is. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the fourth episode, which was titled Beach Reads. Now, with this one, Samuel Donovan slides into the director's chair. Um, he's someone who's directed multiple episodes of shows like, hey, Severance. So, yeah, that alone, here, he already got credit with me. He's also done things like Down Cemetery Road, Three Pines, and The Crown. And beyond Roldan and Harris, due to the editors, the writer of this episode was not Katie DePaul, but someone named Mackenzie Dorr. She was one of the writers from WandaVision, as well as Lock and Key for that matter. So at least I know I'm familiar with her work. The nutshell of the episode, let's put it this way. Patricia, Patricia, Patricia. She tries so hard to throw the perfect party, and things go horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. You just can't trust self-help books anymore. So let's dive in. I think this is certainly the episode that reveals what an outcast Patricia is from her supposed peers when the story is revealed at that party that she really wasn't invited to, but attends anyway. That everyone believed that she lied about the boogeyman that showed up at her house when she was a teen because there was no proof, no record of calls, and people just felt she did it for attention. This story, and I think then our view of this character, which I think before this episode was, oh, she's got this dry, funny kind of quality. She has a habit of kind of saying things to kind of undercut, the mayor all the time. This was the episode where he went, oh, I feel so bad for Patricia, or we can call her Patty if it's too much to say Patricia all the time. Um, I mean, we do find out later that's kind of what happened, at least to a certain degree. But everything plays out like the biggest cringe-inducing tragedy, that I can recall seeing on a television show in some time.
This is Carrie. This
Oh yeah.
is, and my little deep dive, I froze the screen on the paddy wagon at the beginning, and here are some of the titles I could make out. There was a book by an author called Mark Greaney, who's a thriller writer who apparently wrote a series of books called the Gray Man books, and they're not horror, they're just thrillers. There's an Asimov book that you can't make out the title to. There's a book that part of the title just says How to Defend. There is a book you can read the entire title to that says The Stargate Conspiracy, ET Life in Ancient Egypt, which, by the way, is a real book. I love that her bookmobile is the paddy wagon. You see that on the side. Pattiwagon. In the books dropped off, there's a Stephen King book. We see Stephen King. But in talking about the fleshing out of her this episode, the thing I really love about this episode is you see all sides of her. She is nutty, kooky, but she's also really good at her job and does a lot. That she builds up this bookmobile. It's her bookmobile to provide a service to the community. Later in the episode, when she finds out there's a competing party, she knows the rules and she's going to shut down Bill Rooney's party at the Elks Lodge because you can only have 30 people there. You learn that this is a person that she's good at her job, she knows what she's doing, and she's just looking for connection. And that's what's sad is like this is like the best night of her life for a little while until she finds out what's really going on. And there's some great Easter eggs if you watch this again to tell that there's some weird stuff going on that you don't realize at the time. And on rewatch, this episode's full of it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even to rewind some of what you were saying, I mean, the Stephen King book that's in the Book Donation box, it's actually a copy of The Shining. So if there was going to be a book where, that we see outright in this series, that would be one of the one you'd find. Absolutely Carrie. I mean, I've thought about that the whole time I was watching the episode. Carrie White, character from that book, was also ostracized and mocked by her peer group. Only then it was while she was in high school. This is by people that she knew from high school. And when the true horror of Carrie kicks into high gear, she's wearing a tiara at a big dance. Well, isn't that at least what we believe we see Patricia is wearing and what happens here? There's even a little bit of blood that trickles on Patricia's head, probably a lot more in Carrie, of course. Um, it's only later after Rosemary expresses her qualms and Sheriff Bashir shows up that we see that Patricia has been cutting up birds and animals for the punch, and the headdress she's wearing is a little tiara. It's not a little tiara, it's some antler and small animal monstrosity. But, it's one of those things when you watch it again, you realize, people are making fun of what she has on her head. And you realize they're not talking about the tiara because they haven't taken the Kool-Aid yet, so to speak.
Yeah.
They see the antler thing that's on her head at that time. But that book, because you mentioned going in on the titles of all the other ones, the self-help book that she finds. It's called Your Turn. Out with the old and in with the you. The author's name is Lucy Forbes.
Lucifer.
Not the most subtle one there.
It's like Angel Heart, Louis Cypher.
You also might notice that it's in the box, and yes, there was a little bit of trash on top, but not much. But also at least one or two other points, there's a fly on the book, buzzing on the book. You might or realize that flies and insects like that are often associated with demons and the devil. I mean, just think about all the flies in Amityville Horror for that matter. Um, overall, you have a lot of different, horror movies and things being referenced throughout this episode. We've talked about Carrie. The more we hear about Boogeyman, the more we realize it sounds like it's a riff on Halloween, maybe Friday the 13th, but it's really more Halloween than anything else. But then you see Patricia's bizarre headdress and those little figures we see arranged throughout the bar, all the way to that beachside bonfire. These are all visual references to the Wicker Man. But one of my favorite little things in the entire episode It's one of those because there are a number of little touches that if you're paying attention, you'll see them. Like I think a lot of people we noticed one or both times where we notice that the crowd at the when they're dancing are actually not dancing. They're standing there insanely slack-jawed to the point of looking rather creepily demonic. Um, the subliminal shot where it flashes right in between dance moves as we cut past one person, so we see it super briefly. They link. It's a bit more easy to see in the mirror a little bit later on in the episode. But I just love all these little touches that you start to become more and more aware of as you're watching. But my favorite little one is early in the episode, when she's brought the book into her house. She puts it on the night table. It's on the night table already. Well, I don't think we actually see her put it on it. It's already on the night table. She puts her cup of, I'm assuming if it's late at night, she's probably having a cup of tea, not coffee. And then she goes to the other side of the room to do something. And when she comes back, she doesn't seem to notice that the cup has been moved off the book. And if you watch it again, if you notice it the first time, watch it again, put the volume up really loud, you'll hear the cup being moved off the book, which I thought that was really amazing. Then when she opens the book, the quiz section, the what do you love about yourself and what do you hate about yourself? Um, I think she answers fairly honestly. I do think the second answer especially is true. What does she hate about herself? I care too much what other people think. Yeah, you do. But then there's that really just kind of creepy nude illustration of a woman. It's just a little bit too, and they ask what her worst features are, and I like that okay, she circles her shoulders, her chin, and her breasts. I was like going, shoulders?
Yeah, I mean, it was almost like a medical diagram. It was creepy, but going back to something just a little bit before that that I loved in this episode is the sheriff looks at that footage
Yeah,
and sees that
literally,
she's sitting at that picnic table and reading that book where he's fast forwarding and it's like long periods of time she's not even moving. She's
right.
just sitting there reading that book.
Right. That happens after. And yeah, what's interesting about that to me, I was wondering about that. So she's sitting there for hours and hours and hours. At one point, before we see it replayed on the video that the sheriff sees and goes, "What the hell?" When you see her sitting there, you'll notice in the background that these two cyclists collide with each other and start fighting with each other. And I was wondering, was that just coincidental, or perhaps there was like an aura of evil emanating from the book that might have caused that uh, around her? I just thought that was kind of interesting. I
Well,
also, oh, go ahead.
I want to throw real quick before I forget.
Yeah,
The Rosemary is she's sort of like the person telling you none of this is what you think. She says to her early in the episode that there was weird stuff on your list. Half of it I don't even know what it is. And she said, and you might choose a different headpiece. She says that to her
yeah,
earlier in the episode. Um, and then after her speech, Rosemary says, I didn't understand a word of that speech.
right. Because the realization is what we think we heard with her, giving a very nice word, is more likely her reading incantations from the book. So it probably just
Yes.
sounded like she was casting spells and whatever, which is what leads to people who are all at the bar to then start marching into the water. I'm never clear on how and when the bonfire was done and lit. I don't think they ran out and did that. They don't think that time it, so it probably already was there. So that was the one thing I was kind of like, who had time to do that? When did that happen? It's not a problem with the episode. I was just more of a curiosity thing. Rosemary, of course, she steals the episode and the back and actually her and Patty both with their exchange, which featured the word qualms, which I think is one of the most iconic meme generating quotes of the entire series.
Yes.
When Rosemary expressed that she had qualms, and she's like, qualms?
Yeah. And shout out let's shout out the budget for music in this episode. they paid for "This is how we do it," but, Dale didn't have premium, so you got an ad as in the middle of "This is how we do it" on the dance floor. But then they splurged, and for the dance sequence, they got David Bowie's "Let's Dance," which, is awesome.
I don't know. You know, it's really weird. I did not remember Bowie's "Let's Dance" being used in it. That's very strange.
It's
Because
right before the toast when she's dancing with everyone.
the thing I remember most from it, because what they used during the dance, and then they use it again over the end credits, is "Rhythm of the Night." This is the rhythm of the night. Whoa. You know that one. That
Yeah.
I thought was like the chorus. Why am I not remembering? That's weird. I'm gonna have to watch the episode again. I don't know why. Of all things, for me not to realize it was a David Bowie song playing is very strange. Huh.
But as we end the episode, this sort of begins this, I'd say, 4-episode arc where at the end of the previous episode, we start talking about sunset cocktails and, Tom and Patricia go different ways, and Patricia's mad and in this episode calls Tom, and we hear her end of the conversation that's on his answering machine in episode 3 of "Why aren't you here? You're not here." Um, and we also this is where we hear initially, uh, we'd heard at the end of episode 3, Bashir on the radio saying something's going on, get every unit here. And we hear that as Bashir finally snaps her out of it and they run to the water to save everyone and have a very Evil Dead type moment where she can't get the book out of her hand until it's burned. And then when it burns, it makes noises and the fire goes up. So
Right.
I thought that was a nice touch. And Bashir is sort of like, he's sort of been like the rational man on the island. Um, and again, that will play through until his eyes are opened later in the show. But this is great, and we end going back to the mythology. And I'm sure you may have a bridge there, so I'll throw it to you.
No, no, no. I was just gonna say one of the nice things about the ending is that there's a strange sort of sweet acceptance when Wick and Tom find Patricia walking listlessly. You know, this is after she's been accused of drugging the entire party at the Salty Whale. Um, it's she's brought in, and here she is part of something. Even if it's this incredibly strange trio of misfits, that's the genuine look of acceptance, if not happiness,
Found
on her face.
family.
Yeah, and I thought that was really kind of a nice touch here. And of course, they do go to the church, and that's where they find that the Reverend Bryce has hanged himself. And I remember thinking at the time, it's a shame we didn't get to see more of Toby Huss, flex more of his comedic and dramatic muscles on this series because we know what he's capable of. But that was the part he got. So there it is. I know I mentioned it before we started recording, and I know I mentioned at the outset that the writer of this was from WandaVision. I just think it was interesting that but I don't think I mentioned it on the podcast. That with WandaVision, a lot of it became based on the fact that the main character was dealing with something called in the Marvel universe called the Darkhold, which is a book of the damned, the book of evil spells and whatever, and that's what was at the core of this episode as well. I do not think it was a coincidence. This kind of concept has been around for ages. This whole book of dark magic, we were referencing Evil Dead with the Necronomicon, but this actually goes back to more like H.P. Lovecraft, even though more people tend to associate with the Evil Dead. With all that said, because I got my eyes on the time, we are going to move on to the 5th episode. What to expect on your trip? Ha ha. This episode was directed by Andrew DeYoung, who has directed several episodes of The Chair Company, as well as episodes of Our Flag Means Death and Pen 5 or 15, or is it just penis? So he knows something about doing absurdist comedy. Oh, he also directed some Paul Rudd movie from a few years ago, Friendship. And the writer of this episode is the person that Brian mentioned at the outset before we got into the episode. This was the one that Colton Dunn wrote. You already gave his background, and I knew him best as being the guy who played Garrett from Superstore, which was basically the best character. But he has a lot of credits for both writing and acting on the several comedy series over the last several years. So, what is this episode about? Oh lordy! Well, Tom accidentally does some really potent shrooms Wick makes some connections to the island's past. Evan dawdles near the original Boogeyman's house, and we learn Tom might not have been telling the whole truth about what happened to his wife.
Yeah, this this is a wild episode because this is both comic and horror when you see the normal side of what's happening and you see his perception of it through the mushrooms that he's taking. But I thought this gave little flashes of a lot, and we see through this disjointed storytelling him flashing through different parts of the day, and I really really liked it. It's disjointing you as well because you don't know what's happening, so every little bit you have to catch up, which I think is an effective way to try to show you what Tom's going through.
Hey, funny thing with me, I would say when I watched this episode the first time, I was not the biggest fan of this episode. It took a subsequent viewing for me to truly appreciate it. And, it's not that I didn't quote unquote get it the first time. I just didn't know if I liked what I got. But when I watched it the second time, I was like, oh no, I'm very good with this. I mean, and also kind of it becomes one of a couple episodes to kind of break the pattern of what we had done before. Like I mentioned, the whole monster of the week kind of a thing. Like, well, you don't really have that in this episode unless you want to say his drug experience counts for that. I don't think it counts for that. Um, but there's so many interesting things that happen throughout this episode, and the oddity of how they do the time jumps and the different gaps of time and what that whether that means anything. Hell, the fact that there's a shot, or I think the opening shot, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think it's the opening shot of the episode. The present day opening shot. I mean, because I remember we see something that takes place further back. I'm not talking about that. They do this thing. There's probably a better technical word for it. I refer to it as a kind of a corkscrew camera movement that, but which it opens with that, and it also closes with that. Except at the end, it goes right into a darkened doorway or into an abyss, so to speak. So I do like the book ending of that, and there's a lot of interesting visual flourishes they do throughout this episode, using by use of it's almost like they go to like almost to like a fisheye lens, but to a great exaggeration. So you see moments where it looks like Tom's head has been elongated. It's trying just to hit the this is the drug experience kind of a thing. Not that there's any. Of course, these are a special kind of shrooms, so we can't really compare them to the way people normally experience these, as I've been told by other people. Because from what I hear, this doesn't really remind anyone of any shroom experience they had. But that's not a mistake. It's just these are a special kind of thing. They're the true sight ones.
Yes, true side. Open your third eye. The A great cameo in this episode by comedian Chris Fleming as the drug dealer, and I enjoyed the comedy in this episode before it gets weird, where he thinks Tom is Wick and Tom drinks. Wick is the one. The only way out is through, and he's gonna do it, but Tom ends up drinking. And then Tom panics, which not that to say that I know this, but allegedly the mental state you enter that state in is the one that is prevalent throughout that trip, and Tom enters it panicked and remains panicked and scared throughout the entire trip.
Right. I knew that you were going to be a fan of the scene with the shaman. Um, whose character's name is Todd O'Connor.
Yeah.
A very tiny little house for a drug dealer.
Yes.
And they talk about the true sight, which is, it's like LASIK for the third eye, which sounds like a sales pitch if I ever heard one. There's something in this scene with when the shaman is talking with Wick and Tom and Patty there. Tells about I think it was the person who had done the true sight before. He was referring to these drawings. He keeps thinking, and then when we see the drawing, we think it's a gag because we think it's basically just the outline of a hand, like a kid would do if they were doing like a Thanksgiving Day turkey drawing when they were like 5 years old or something. But that's not what it is. That's not what it is, kids. Because if you're watching closely, It's two moments in the season that you'll see. Oh, that's not what that is at all. That's an outline of the entire Widow's Bay Island. We see it on the Doppler thing, the radar, and we also see it in an illustrated map as well. That's essentially the island of Widow's Bay. Uh, did not notice that the first time I watched the show. Noticed the second time. I thought that was really something kind of fun and interesting.
It is, and I think the dealer calls it sacred geometry. Is when he says, "I'm going to show you the art that the previous person did." And interestingly, he says, "Don't look at any mirrors once you take this."
Well, it's interesting because then of course they hit you with a gag right at the top where he closes the door behind them. No,
And there's a
knowing
mirror.
full there's a mirror behind the door, so
Yes.
Tom does see himself in the mirror. We play with mirrors a little bit throughout the show. For example, if you go back and watch the previous episode, when Sheriff Bashir finally says something like, Patty, what the fuck are you doing, or whatever, and that's what snaps her out of the spell she's under, quite literally. And then she looks in the mirror and sees what she looks like. But if you were to go back and watch earlier on when she's doing all the stuff over there, that mirror is right there. Hey, you know what you don't see? You don't see her in the mirror, even though
Yes.
she's right by it. So they do take care to not have that be visible. Um, and there are things where, like, we're supposed to see the reflection of ugly Hortense, and that never happens. But at least there's the thing. Also, something that's going to happen here. So he takes the shrooms through unintentionally through the coffee or whatever it is he's drinking.
Tea. Looks like
Tea.
tea, yeah.
Do you realize how many times someone is drugged in one form or another through something that they drink throughout the series?
A lot.
It's a lot. I mean, it happens enough times where it cannot be a coincidence. If it happened like two times, okay, no, but three times, it's more than three times, I'm pretty sure. Because you have that here. You have, the flashback episode in someone's brandy. You have what we try to do with Ruth. You have the punch. That's four right there. I bet there's another one I'm not even thinking of off the top of my head. It's very strange to have that repeated
It's
so many
it's
times.
it's very strange, and as he flashes through his time, there is an interesting moment that the one coworker that he can't seem to hear anything from at all,
Uh-huh.
and they do a weird pull on her, is Ruth. And remember, this is supposed to tell you the truth. When Ruth comes in his office, he can't really hear her at all. And I thought that was interesting on rewatch.
Right. Yeah. Yep. That's true. Oh, just to throw in a I guess, Jaws is my thing. We gotta throw in there's a kind of funny little Jaws thing that happens right in the middle of this episode during his trip. When he wakes up from one of his time jumps and he's in I guess what I call the room where the members of the community come to argue, and they're all yelling at him about the curfew that he's decided to have instituted. This is basically the community in Jaws all getting, riled up and complaining to the sheriff about the no swimming signs and banning swimming from the place. It's the same damn thing. So I thought, oh, even though he's all screwed up, we're still going to Jaws. And then we have a time jump there, and there's the thing he wrote on the blackboard, excuse me, the whiteboard, which do I think I have it written down somewhere? Is it about the
It
something about
says when I turn around, everyone close their eyes.
See, there's this thing about eyes here. Because you got that. You got all the stuff about the third eye, the true sight, whatever. You got the thing that's etched on the Reverend's desk after, about my eye is open. So again, there's something we're repeating over and over. And you got the fact that people of a certain time period seem to like to gouge out people's eyes all the time. So,
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a nice little piece of character development in this episode that Wick goes back to the historical society with the journal page. And we established that his relationship with the woman at the historical society is a little more than casual.
right, Jerry. And that's where we discover a little scrap of paper turns out to have been something because she's like a professional archivist in what she does there. And it's the last page of a journal that was kept by Sarah Westcott Warren. They had this lovely habit of giving us these nice little bits of information that are going to lead to something that we're going to see established in the very next episode. They do that for a bunch of episodes in a row here. I think that's kind of cute. And I think they continue to do it, quite frankly, throughout the series. Um, Trying to think of anything else worth mentioning in the episode.
There's one thing worth mentioning.
Oh yeah, no, that's definitely. I'm looking at my list here.
That I mean, Matthew Rhys is always the straight man, but being the high guy in this episode, when he walks all the way around the car, looking in the car, like when his son pulls up to the house, that is just comedy gold. When he is like a creeper, all he does a full 360 of the car. I thought that was fantastic.
Well, the look they're trying to do with between the shirt he has on and the fact there's the unexplained ketchup remnants and stains throughout the shirt, which obviously look like blood. So now they've basically made him look like a zombie. He's
Yes.
basically he's walking around the thing as though he was a zombie. The stuff with his son, of course, earlier in the episode, Evan with their his dopey friends. This is where we learn more about the boogeyman. They park, outside the house where the person who was a boogeyman actually lived or something. And we get that awful kid PJ telling us a different story about the boogeyman. That's where, they that shot him, but apparently they couldn't kill him. So they apparently buried him in the basement and sealed it off with concrete. He never actually died. Important to notice for a couple reasons. We're going to get to the boogeyman later on, and also the fact that there are multiple characters who cannot die but are buried instead, only to eventually be unearthed on this series, which we're going to be seeing fairly shortly. I also love the bit with when the sheriff stops him from going into the house, and he's over there. And he says, "Can I say fuck you, pig?" As I walk away, it's like, "No, you may the fuck not."
Yes. Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah, this is so great. Kevin Carroll. I mean, he's trying to keep these people from being stupid, and he's doing a good job. Um, and I think the last thing I've got is then we see in Tom's Hayes the full sort of arc of the pregnancy of his wife with his son, and we see the event on the ferry where they try to leave. She goes blind. It's attributed to preeclampsia, and we see the doctor tell him the baby is fine, but she's going to need time. And they do one of those weird, like crazy people in an insane asylum thing where she's sitting on the bed looking normal but doesn't move at all,
Mhm.
like creepy thing. And
Like
the door
she's
closes.
catatonic, basically.
Yes, and then he sees the abyss, and strangely enough, man, this is why I love this show. It's so quirky. It ends on the song "Amber" by 311, which is such a weird vibe, except for the drug part of this show. It's a very druggy song, but I thought like the thing that's really impressed me throughout this show is they give you a lot of information in a short period of time, and you understand what happened with him and his wife, that they were happy, and then it just all went tits up in this moment when trying to leave the island. And I thought that was really fascinating that happened in the middle of his trip.
Well, yeah. I mean, you have an episode that has a rather somber and unfortunate ending, whereas the bulk of the episode plays more comedic and odd than perhaps the previous four did. I mean, I think that might be why I liked it more the second time, and maybe why the first time I was getting more impatient with the episode. So this might be one of those series, at least this specific episode, for me at least, it just worked better a second time along. Happens with a lot of movies I've seen. So it was only 30 something minutes out of my life. I didn't mind. But yeah, it's really setting the tone. And this is, and when you realize when we get to the end, we have now seen exactly half the season, half the series, which means we are going to start bringing this podcast to a close so we can start fresh, fresh, fresh Like in 15.
Well, in my chum bucket of the last things I want to add, there are a few things in my notes that I thought were standout moments. I love when the funniest thing the sheriff gets to say is when Tom says set up a perimeter about the sea hag, and he said the island has a perimeter, Tom. It's called the ocean. Great line.
Yep.
I like that Patricia calls back Tom saying, the boogeyman wouldn't come after her now because she was too old. When Tom says, I was scratched by an elderly woman, and she says, was she in her 40s? A great joke.
Yeah, that's a great joke.
And then I think, I don't remember if we mentioned it, but maybe the best sight gag on this show when Tom ejects the sea hag by hitting the recliner lever and ejects her over the top of his head when she climbs on his face. I mean, just an all-timer sight gag. But that's the last of my chum bucket of things that I wanted to mention.
Oddly enough, one of the production companies behind this, I don't know who it's attached to, is the name of their production company is Chum.
Really
I noticed that. I thought, oh, it's kind of like
interesting.
just before the spooky tree one comes up, there's one before this is Chum, and the first thing I thought of is not buddy or pal. I'm thinking Chum like from Jaws.
Yeah.
Alrighty then. So, needless to say, we will be back toot sweet with coverage of the final 5 episodes of Widow's Bay. Who knows? Depending on how we feel, our energy level, because we're going to be recording very shortly. I might even, I might even be an idiot and bring up some other Apple TV shows during that podcast wrap up, like a 2 minute bit. That's all. But maybe I won't have time for that. Anyway, we're the Serious TV Drama Podcast, sometimes known as the STVD Podcast. And if you plug one or the other into your search engine, Google, whatever, odds are you'll find us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever. Hey, if you ever want to follow me, I don't know why you'd want to. I'm at Esoteric Candy on both Instagram and Twitter. Brian, as always, been lovely doing this with you, so to speak. That's what she said.
Oh, it was great. I mean, this is a show that I was excited about, love it, and we're gonna come right back and tell you about the rest of it.
That's right. And to listeners, thanks for listening. Now remember, when I turn around, everyone close their eyes, and maybe we'll be back even sooner than you ever imagined. Good night.